Hello, everyone. Come on in. And good evening, as it is here in Denmark. An afternoon where you are, Liz, right?
Yeah.
So welcome, ladies, and welcome, Liz, to this conversation about pelvic health and female pelvic health, and on this course anyway, and the Psoas. So, and then welcome to all the yoginis watching with us tonight. We have all of these ladies, and now we're about 20 people watching with us live. So Liz, welcome. You are an international teacher and author, and you have more than 45 years of experience working with and specializing in the Psoas. Welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you are the awesome author of these beautiful books. I'm just going to show them to you. We have the Psoas book. We have Core Awareness, Enhancing Yoga, Pilates, Exercise, and Dance. And I have this new piece of yours, Stalking Wild Psoas, which is my favorite so far.
Thank you.
And then you have some other contributions as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I did one called Maiden Mother Crone, which was a collaboration with 3 women, me being the crone.
Oh,
on pleasure.
Oh, wow.
It was called our pleasure playlist.
Oh,
and
wow.
Each one of us chose 5 things of how we really find sexual pleasure. And I talked about Psoas and O-rings.
Oh, yes, the O-rings, Paula.
The O-rings, yes.
I love it, I love it.
Stay juicy. How to stay juicy.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to talk to you and share your approach to all of this body work. Anyway, these women that are watching today, they're on this pelvic balance course, and I would love for you to talk us into this new paradigm shift that's going on. And the paradigm shift, I'm saying this because it's essential for your work, I believe. You have the process, not against, but you have the biomechanical model over here with the body as an object. And I think, and I can just speak for myself, within my culture, my body, it's my head, it's my rationale talking into the whole conversation about pelvic floor. I'm saying this because I want you to talk into that as you go into this new paradigm shift.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Sophie. And thanks everybody for having me and listening. So one of the main things I think if you want to understand Psoas is you have to leave the biomechanical model. It doesn't fit in that model. It's why I left it. Okay, it just didn't resonate. But the moment I met embryology, the moment I met biodynamic, which I understood as a gardener, but in my own tissue, then we're changing language of body from object to process. And so we're looking at a living organism. We're looking at something that's dynamic, that's constantly changing, that isn't a done deal. So there's a lot of hope in that model. Yes. I can say, because when people say, can I change? It's like you can't not change. Okay, so you're going to get some choices of which direction and how you want to flourish in your life. So just drop that in. So one of the conversations you and I had is the around pelvic floor. So should I jump in there?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So I when people talk about pelvic floors, I go, I don't have a floor. I have a dynamic pelvis. I have a dynamic diaphragm. So we're a fluid organism, and we have tissue that's very buoyant. So you can call them domes, you can call them diaphragms, but they're not flat. They're not hard. They're not impermeable. So when we're using the mechanistic model, we're trying to create density in the core to protect ourselves, to hold things in. But that's like we're a house. And so if the floor is weak, you're going to want to reinforce it. If you have walls, you're going to want to reinforce them. If your spine's a column, you're going to want to stabilize it. And what goes on with your psoas, which is a dynamic, very, very fluid tissue, like juicy tissue. It's filet mignon. It's the finest cut of meat we eat in an animal. It is almost like non-existent. It's not this muscle. But when we engage it like that, it can get dense, it can get dry, it can get overstabilized, and then it causes actually a lot of dysfunction. Yeah. So that's why the conversation has to shift.
It has to change. And I think when you're describing the psoas, which I would like for you to just go a little deeper into, because I think a lot of women here don't even know where is the psoas. I'm just hearing and seeing this pelvic diaphragm tissue in front of my eyes, because that's exactly, in my opinion, what happens to our bodies when we go around squeezing or believing that we can fix something that's broken or weak, you know. Yes.
Let's pick up on weak. So if we think tissue is weak, muscle is weak, the biomechanical concept is you strengthen it. It needs more activity. It needs more exercise. You need to, you know, do something that makes it stronger. But if you understood that psoas isn't weak, it's exhausted.
Yeah.
It might be dry. It's lost a lot of its supple juiciness. Then we're going to do something totally different.
Yes.
We're going to approach ourselves differently. We're going to approach this idea of how do I have, you know, functional movement? How do I have my organs floating in this connective tissue? How is my nervous system flourishing in its capacity to keep growing in a fluid organism? So we change it even in anatomy now. We're looking at, which is biomechanical, because you're looking at dead tissue, not living, moving bodies. But they're looking at fluid cadavers now because we're a matrix. And when we're looking at cadavers that are dry, we can't see that matrix. So the study of connective tissue has made my work relevant, because I was talking about it before the science of connective tissue because I explored it from inside. But all of a sudden there's this language. So in the language of the neural core is what we're talking about. That means that if you look at a fluid organism, that's a matrix of fluid. It's not something, they're not cut up into these parts. So it's like, I don't want to just talk about psoas. I want to see it as a part of a system, part of a larger network of information. Then you're looking at a system that's functioning whole. And the connective tissue isn't fluid inside something. It literally is fluid. We literally are fluid. And just as our organs float and tissue floats, the whole matrix that shapes us is fluid. So if we're doing things to make it dense, what we're taking is that fluid system into collapse or into density. And it's taking the nerves, which are floating in that and communicating, because we know water is a good conduit for electrical impulses, and entrapping them. So now we have pain, you know, and we don't know why the pain is there. And sometimes it's referred pain, and we're tracking and we're trying to catch that pain, but it's really allowing for the whole system to reorganize it in its fluid capacity to self-right itself, to organize, to heal. It's the lack of that that's not allowing the organism to fully come into being, or to maintain its capacity to recapitulate or to keep changing shape and form. So we're really shapeshifters. We're not static objects. And the minute we go into static object, we are drying our organism out. So there really isn't a lot of down the road, the ability to maintain that. It's going to keep, you know, disintegrating, because there's not the flourishing like you would something that's been fed well and nourished well. And that's what we're looking at exhaustion. When we're looking at exhaustion, this neural core, this is and I'm not a connective tissue expert, but you know, they tell me stories. And Sue Hitzman is one of the people who tell me that story in how to open up the connective tissue. And she would say, you know, the deepest double bag of your organism, let's little fluid, juicy, with different bags within bags within bags, is this neural core. And the neural core is the axis, what we think of as South and North Pole, the very center of our being. Yeah. And the very center of our being has your spinal cord, your psoas, your kidneys, and your adrenals. It's about survival, but it's also about flourishing. So when we don't want somebody in there poking, we don't want to try to fix that. We're actually nourishing it. So it, like a flower, I always say to people, you know, show me a flower that you can trigger point, that you can stretch, that you can palpate into blossoming.
I love that picture. That is awesome.
We're going to have to get into the rooting system, right, to allow it to flourish. We have to provide the qualities of health that it needs, the sun, and, you know, but so think of psoas as a rooting system. It's literally rooting us to the earth. It's helping us orient here in space and time.
Yes.
And it's in telling us if we are coherent or not, or if there's something disrupted.
Yeah, because you call it a messenger of the midline, right?
I do. And in embryology, what midline means isn't a literal thing. Yeah, that axis isn't a literal. But if you go to the North Pole or South Pole, you know, the electromagnetic field, you're looking at a field of energy. So embryologically, if we look at that story, which is a living model rather than a mechanical model imposed on a living system, you're looking at that, you know, you start as wholeness, and that cell divides and multiplies, and it begins to organize around this axis. And as it organizes around the axis, it is being shaped both externally in your mother's womb of her fluids, but inside also the skin of the organism or the cell is this fluid. So we're fluid being shaped by fluid. But we're organizing around our own core integrity or our own axis. And in embryology, that's called the primitive streak. It's called the notochord. It's called the midline. And what you're and eventually our central nervous system, and what we think of as our spine.
Yes.
So psoas is merging out of that. Nobody connected it to it. It's emerging out of it. So if I'm trying to overstabilize my core, then I'm actually recruiting this diagonal tissue. So it starts around right around where your last rib is, and it can grow out slightly different for different people because nobody grows exactly the same. And it is a triangular tissue that's about the size of your fist, and it grows into the lesser trochanter, which is, if you know, your greater trochanter is the one on the hip bone, your hip bone on the side of your hip. So if you kind of imagined it across from that on the inside, it's growing into there. And then the psoas is also part of the iliacus. It's the iliopsoas. Opens up like a mushroom, you know, like, or a fan, and fills the inside of the pelvis. So it's creating a bowl, you know, it's a basin. It's the nest. It's the truly the holding of civilization. You know, there's no one in the world who has not come through the body of a woman.
No,
I can still say
that's true. Yeah. You actually, on your website, you call it psoas the guardian of the hara. And I think that's just a beautiful expression to describe not the role, but, you know, that hugging or that protection you're talking about in the inside the pelvis. I usually call it the psoas hugs the pelvis.
Well, the iliacus does, it blossoms up and literally fills the ilium. So if your psoas is dry, what it does to your ilium is it also pulls, and that actually creates the dysfunctional pelvis and disrupts the iliums or the pelvis being a whole basin, not one side or the other, or the ilium part of the leg, and then you're pulling on the spine to try to get range of motion, but an actual center of being. And you know, the center of the hara, the tandien, the Buddha belly. In Taoist healing, it's called the muscle of the soul.
Oh, I love that. That's very, very beautiful. Also, specifically for me, because I respond to your new model, if I may say so, the biointelligent side of the paradigm that speaks to my soul, and it doesn't speak to my head as the biomechanical model does. when you say pelvic basin, since I'm a whole woman practitioner, I've gained a new knowledge that the pelvis is more a ring on its edge. So when you say basin, all of that biomechanical knowledge of the pelvic floor just goes into this floor knowledge of carrying everything up above. And I think when we turn the pelvis on its edge with the pelvic bones underneath us, with a sternum on top, giving it strength when you put strength on it, we have a different perspective of the whole, as you say, the diaphragm. And when you're moving like this, this is like an octopus, or, the whole breathing pattern, the moving of the tissue as you're speaking of.
Yes, and Christine Kent gave me permission to use her drawing of the pelvis, which is in the 30th edition of the Psoas book.
Yes.
And so I don't know if you have an older one than that, but I have this 30th edition, then it's actually in that one, because she was the first person that helped me. Like I already knew that. I didn't have the language that she has. Yes. And there's that other beautiful one of just a simple line drawing that includes the psoas. It's the next page. Yeah. No, I think it's actually turned that. I think it's maybe before that. So I'd have to look. But I use it actually in my teaching. There it is. Yes. It's one of the only ones. If you look at anatomy, you always see the tuberosities or sits bones in the front. Yes. Because it's splayed. The body's splayed because it's hanging on a chain. Mm-hmm. And there, so I show the contrast when I'm teaching, because I want people to see, yes, that I love the idea of the ring, yes.
This edge.
Yes.
What's underneath.
Beautiful.
You have all of this going on.
Your tail. Then your tail can be up and sassy. Yes.
Yes, so we're going to go back to that, but I would love for you to speak into the whole fluid thought, and also the fishy spine that we have, because when I teach these women with pelvic organ prolapse, I have a prolapse myself, cystocele, the bladder prolapse. I don't have any symptoms because I work with the body every day, of course, and I've learned so much about myself these past few years. I believe that we can, of course, as you say, the organs are floating. The pelvic organs are not static, or everything is ruined, or they're, sitting somewhere or being pushed out, and that's a state forever. We can change our bodies, and Absolutely. It is movable, and movement is your medicine. You can move your pelvic organs to the front of your belly, right? Because we are fluid. And that fluid conception, I would love for you to bring Emily Conrad, for example, or the fish into the table.
So before I say that, I want to say that we have to look at the contrast to the biomechanical concept of being core as dense, or strong core, which is the overstabilization of the abdominals, and the idea that your spine is a column. And so you want to really kind of create all this density to support that column.
Thank you. So planking is
so once you like doing that, you're locking the system down. So there is no fluid fish movement there. And so we have to understand that the majority of fitness and exercise, and even things like Pilates, unless you're very somatically oriented and approaching it with a more dynamic way of looking at it, are going to try to extend that pelvis. Even yoga, right? There's the tucking of the tail.
Yes.
So there's that. And now what that does is it creates, if you look at the top of the pelvis, the rim, the crest, it creates it parallel with the floor. Men tend to have pelvises that are more extended than women do. And most of these traditions come out of male traditions. So to them, that's the idealized male pelvis, is to be with more extension in it. But even men who really want to be responsive and dynamic in movement, think of American football players and watch them hike a ball between their legs. Their pelvis is up and their tail is up and their butts are up. way up high because that's where power comes from.
Exactly. Like
So,
it needs a tense
yes.
to.
So even though they stand and their pelvis might go into more of that supporting weight on top, it's a different dynamic. So for women, we have flexed pelvises. So as long as somebody's telling you to tuck your tail, that's a submissive behavior, but it's also a weak behavior. It's a dynamic in which you have lost your power and expression. So that takes me into primal movement, because psoas expresses safety and all its dynamics because it's part of the sympathetic neurocore. So in that response, whether it's curling because it's protecting itself, something's falling and it goes into a curl, or it's propelled, whether that's in a car or off, out of a tree, or, wherever you fall, the organism in movement rolls. So these are expressions that are like the caterpillar. If you poke a caterpillar, it curls. So these are organic, dynamic, protective expressions in which the system closes down to go into a sense of safety, or it goes out as a way of warding off. So that might be your run, your climb, standing your ground. So if we're overstabilizing the core, we lose expression. We lose our sensuality, our sexuality, our eros. So eros is the movement of life, and the movement of life is water. All living systems are touched by water. They're shaped by water. So once we see that, we start seeing the wave.
Yeah.
And Emily Conrad was a master of entering the portal of the fluid system. So she had a way of just going into this field of the fluid. And she would say, the most important piece, I think, here for the conversation is that it's pre-nervous system. Embryologically, when you're fluid before you're formed, that means you're fluid before you have bones, before you have nerves, before you have muscles. So when we can enter in any capacity into our fluid system and stop freezing it, stop locking it down, stop stabilizing it in some way, our organism's going to start healing. It just is, that's what it does, because it knows how to respond to gravity. It knows how to find its location in space and time. And otherwise, we're kind of disoriented. You can call that, disassociation. You can call that trauma. You can call that all kinds of things. But basically, it's like the animal body can't locate. So creating some fluidity in tissue is as simple as finding your tongue to your tail. Mm-hmm. You could find your tongue to your tail in a bathtub of water where you're letting the spine become more of a fish, which it is. That's where bone comes from, is the ocean. And it's where our bone, it shows up in the womb. So, we're little creatures of fluid that start to be shaped by gravity. But when we return to that, we can start to find this ability for the responsiveness of tissue, which means also the responsiveness of our nervous system, of our organs. Like you said, they're not held in a place. They can relocate. They can start to find their natural relationship to gravity. Mm-hmm. Because it's not just a body as object. It's me as a process that's involved in a larger process. Mm-hmm. And I'm being shaped by my process. Where I am, the room I'm in is shaping me.
That's so important. Also, you talk about the nervous system and the curling, the freezing. I think when we are diagnosed, we find out we have a prolapse, or we pee our pants, we have incontinence, or we have operations, C-section, or movement of the appendix, or other abdominal operations, surgeries. I believe that does something to our system. And a lot of women that I've met, anyway, in my work, we tuck our tail. Maybe it's cultural, maybe it's got something to do with our trauma or the shock or the protection of, I know for myself, I started doing Kegels like hell when I found out I had a prolapse, because I felt something was shifting in my pelvis and I felt something falling, and I needed to catch it and carry it somehow. So that's, I think, instinctively we do that, tucking the tail when something is traumatized.
Yes, and we pull down and we close down and we're overwhelmed. So you could look at the system as overwhelmed. And when we have surgeries, we have to recognize that even though we can't remember the surgery, the animal body lived through it and knows everything that happened. So pain is, just because we're blocked from the pain, it doesn't mean it's not in pain. The tissue of psoas in particular, the reproductive organs move, the nerves to the reproductive organs embed through the psoas. So if your psoas is dry, then all those organs are being affected by the dryness of your psoas. And your psoas is about safety. So am I safe? Am I not safe? And the animal body in surgery is not safe. So we have to actually, it may have saved our life, but we also need to recognize there's a recuperative capacity. The scar tissue itself disrupts connective tissue. So even if you think it's a micro scar, what we know in the connective tissue research is that underneath that the fibroblasts keep spreading in and through the organs. So you're actually have to be actively starting to dissolve the scar on a much deeper response. And it's not about going in and palpating, it's about regaining the fluidity in the whole system. So it's actually, you go larger. Yes, you can roll a scar, you can, do different things that help soften the scar, but you're actually also helping the communication throughout your whole organism, which is where coherency shows up. And that's in the midline. Am I coherent? You could say that's an inner, am I safe? Am I coherent? Am I not safe? Am I not coherent? Because safety is partly based on the ability to organize. And if my own system can't locate to ground. So that brings me into bones, actually. I work a lot with bones as a way to finding those sits bones or tuberosity and actually getting on them and feeling their relationship to the spine. Yes. Like if I don't sit on those, if I sit back, if I sit with my tail tucked, if I'm collapsed all the time just from ergonomics, I'm acting as if I'm curling under. So I have to actually get on top of those to feel the relationship to ground. If I'm standing, it's my feet. If I'm sitting, it's my sits bones. So I want to feel the earth supporting the diaphragms. In other words, it's not that I have to lift something. It's like we don't remember that it's actually our feet that are on the ground. The feet, the bones connect with earth. Yes. And earth supports us. It rebounds. It's called ground force reaction in biomechanics, but it's buoyancy. It's the buoyancy of tissue. So if the diaphragm of my foot, what we call the arch, is buoyant, that's going to support the diaphragm that we call our pelvic floor, but a pelvic diaphragm and our respiratory diaphragm. So we're made of domes, and the domes can be there, and then the respiratory dome can be here, and we have a dome here, we have a dome here. So we're made up of these domes, and they're interacting like the octopus, they're interacting as a whole system, and its bones float in connective tissue. So they're not rigid, they breathe. All tissue is fluid. They're just another layer of fluid bone that galvanizes through minerals when we're on Earth. They're soft, as you see in babies. And then, as we stay here on Earth and we start to organize, the Earth from the bottom up starts to shape us. So whenever we feel misshapen, we have to connect not only to the fluid, but to the Earth through things like bone tapping, finding those sits bones and really actually locating them as a fulcrum in which we can be, sitting on them. But the minute I rock to the beginning forward of it, my body, if I go far enough, will go into an extension, and I'll actually go into an arc. And if I go back all the way, I start going into that fetal curl. That's where I found the primal responses of core, is that they're not about holding myself still. It's about actually allowing it to move, because that's what brings back the fluidity. It calls in the fluidity. You know, it's what's nourishing and feeding us as a rooting system to earth. So it changes our sense of location. We feel safer. And then Psoas is no longer going, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe. You know, you start to go, oh, you know, here I am. I can locate myself. And once I can land and locate, I can begin to make decisions that are based on maybe choosing other options or checking in if this is the best. I kind of start to really tune in to what is true for me. And I think that's where that soulful piece,
yes,
it's unnecessary. It's not in the mechanical model. You go to your physician, you ask them where your soul is, they have, you know, they're gonna look at you like, I think you're in the wrong place here. You know, go to the church, go to the synagogue, go somewhere else to look for your soul. But actually, we are soulful creatures. And in the embryological story, there is a center of being. So Psoas is actually a center of being. It's not something you do something with. It's reading, like it's reading a kind of connection to all life.
And I think that is just very important. That it's not something you do, as you said, it's the being. I think those two are
it's being tissue.
It's being tissue. That's very difficult to understand with our heads and our thoughts.
That's because mechanically everything from your center flexes, everything from your center extends. We've been taught we're a machine.
Yes.
That's a conditioning. That's a cultural conditioning. But what I love about embryology is it's science. We're not negotiating. Actually, biomechanics isn't real science. It's a scientific model put on a living system. Mm-hmm. But we're actually not a machine. So therefore, a living system of thinking is a better way. And I do have a lot of information in starting to look at that. And Stalking Wild is one of the places where you find me changing the model. I do it in all the books. I actually talk about it. I didn't use the word system, but I started talking about Psoas, in the Psoas book, the connection to your feelings, which we don't usually connect how my feelings are connected. Something like you were mentioning Chinese medicine, so, you know, 5-element theory, these energetic flows, they play into the Psoas really well, because all of a sudden you're realizing that if your Psoas is really tight, right? If you've been holding your breath, trying to be good, trying to be upright, trying to hold yourself, trying to pull that, you know, Kegel as high up as you can, the elevator, you know, all the elevator stuff, elevators and walls and floors and columns. What's happening to your kidneys? Your kidneys are a fluid organ. All organs are fluid, but they're about water. They're not water element. Your adrenals are there. If you're dry, you're actually pulling your life force. You're trying to do it with your will, not a relationship to ground.
Yeah. And that relationship on this course, we massage our foot every day with the ball. We also breathe with the toes, you know, so working with that earthy element in the wings of the womb, as we call it within the Yoni Shakti, to connect to Yoni Sthana, the Svadhisthana, the Hara, the water element. Those two connect specifically in the female body, which is so nice.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Yes, thank you so much. Just gonna see if I have some questions from the ones that are watching. I see there are about 30 women. Yes, yes, yes. There are also body workers watching here. They are just loving it. They're giving you high fives and everything.
Thank you.
Yes. The tucking of the tail. Can we speak something more into that? Because I think what I've experienced also in myself, I think that has a key when we're talking about not fixing things, but to do something. What can we actually do? You talk about nourishing the nervous system, but you also talk about creating the fluidity. I think that's very difficult because we are so stiff. And if we believe we're stiff, and and not fluid. I have some women writing me on this course actually saying, you know, it's 7 years ago I gave birth, my tissue is ruined, I have a weak pelvic floor, all these words that we're, you know, trying to use as description for our state of being. That just is very, you give a lot of hope with your biointelligent model, I must say. So how can we do something today to go into the being and go into not the quick fix, but we want a quick fix. You know, we want a quick fix, but we, you know, we're just in between. We hear what you say, but I'm sure a lot of us want to know, how do I move that tail? It's not moving.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to say that aging and drying are not the same thing.
Thank you. There are elder women on this course as well, I must say.
But there's a lot of women who are young who are very dry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So they're not connected. Everybody's going to age, but you do not have to dry out.
Thank you.
Okay. So that means if I am dry, how do I begin to nourish my psoas? How do I begin to attend to the being of my inner core, right? And that's that turning towards. So some of it is rest and rhythm. And, you know, rather than I'm going to try harder, I'm going to do it. I mean, this is where I'm really talking to a cultural way that we are trained, which is a top-down model of control. So the mind is going to control the body, you know, where pain is gain. So some of it is philosophical. You know, some of it is, how do I nurture myself? Do I have rhythm in my life? Are there times I'm busy, times I'm resting, times I'm playing, times I'm loving and caring for myself? So these are ways of being, just like nourishing. The way I think of it is nourishing your spine like a river. You're doing restorative work, and you don't know how long it's going to take. But I will tell you that if you know anything about rain and water and fluids, you know, look in nature for your answers. They're there. So for example, I lived in the redwood forest. That's where I raised my kids. And it sometimes in the winter, which is water element, and you know, it's the time of replenishing. It's the time where things go deep into the earth and rest so that they can bring new life in the spring. But there'd be times when it would rain, and if it rained in just the right way, just the around, and you never know when these things are going to happen. There's a magic to this, okay? There'd be underground springs that would literally pop up as I'm walking down the street. We're not talking about saturation where, you know, it's just natural. It's more like inspiration that would happen. And all of a sudden there'd be like these movements that was like, whoa, you know, and that's how it happens in us.
Yes.
It's not a linear process. It's a love making to yourself. It's a going in and noticing the dryness, but starting to maybe do little puffed O's, like into the area, literally moving your cheeks. Because if your cheeks can't move, your vulva can't move, you know? If you can't open your mouth and speak your truth, your pelvis will never be happy. You know, it's one end speaks to the other end. So I like tongue to tail. So you can spend time moving your tongue. And that's what I was saying. You can do it in a bath. You can do it in a shower by just standing and wrapping your arms and letting your butt go out and start finding tongue to tail and let the water be part of the inspiration. It's the idea of stop intentionally tucking, stop pulling up, stop gravitating, trying to pull everything in and girdling the system. Rather look at it is that it's brilliant, it's intelligent, it actually can heal all tissue. And you can get responsiveness throughout all your tissue. when you allow the fluid to respond. So little rocks. So an example is you could wake up in the morning and instead of jumping out of bed and getting the coffee on and doing whatever you do, take maybe 3 minutes and turn on your side and go into fetal curl, meaning not real locked up unless that feels really good, just rounding from, think of tongue all the way to the tail. So now you're rounding it like a letter C, okay? And you're just coming into that kind of embryological relationship. It's a returning to yourself. And rock your spine, you're from head to tail, just a little rock. And make sure that your head's not leading. So let your heart lead, the rock. So it's like just a little, like you're rocking yourself, like you would waking up the baby, right? The baby's there and you're holding them and they just woke up, and you're just rocking yourself. And you can use some I like long exhales, because what allows that respiratory diaphragm, which is where the upper psoas is, where we've learned to like control and hold and be good and do it right. And, is not only in the brain, it's in our breath. So then a long, exhale that goes on and on and on until all of a sudden the organism is no longer breathing, it's being breathed. And you don't know when that will happen. At first, you're just going to do these long ones. Sometimes you can't get very far. And then you do another one, you can't get very, you don't try harder, you try less. So when you're trying to hydrate, the cues of hydrating is less is more. It's lighter. You're doing what I call lofting. So I have videos on my website and stuff where I'm working with balls and stuff. I mean, it's so subtle. And people will say, well, I don't see anything. I said, that's what I want you to see. Is that I'm not doing anything. Okay. But if you start to watch, you'll start to see my organism, literally the tissues start to come alive. Just as if you were watching, a worm in the garden or, a caterpillar in your hand, you start to see the movement, you feel the movement. The movement, you start being moved rather than moving. This is a profound experience of healing, because that's the organism starting to show up. And if you can it's an art. It's not it's an art to be able to follow and not try to lead, to try to do, to try to, and just a few minutes of that. And then, let your system just unravel however it's going to feel comfortable and get out of bed and see if that 3 to 5 minutes starts to shift your awareness a little bit and takes the mind and doesn't make it as such a high priority of thinking into what I call kinesthetic awareness. You're starting to tune into your own sensory system. And I know when we're in pain, all we want to do is get out of there, right? So you're really looking at, how do I comfort that? How do I hold that? How am I being with that discomfort for just a few moments? Yeah. And I have a lot of ways, little Zoom classes you can do if you want to learn specific ideas around this, but that's a really practical, it's incredibly practical, just as it is to be with your feet every day.
That's awesome. I think that's what we need to take time. We actually need our doing to go being. Does that make sense?
Right, it's out of proportion.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with being active and, playing a sport or, doing whatever you love to do and caring for your family or, whatever it is that you want to achieve. Okay. We're not saying it's one or the other.
No.
Core is actually a combination of that. And what I discovered along my journey, which I had a lot of pain and discomfort as a young woman, it was that the balance of those has to do with rhythm. Part of it has to do with, but the other thing I realized was I basically taught in a more functional way early in my teaching, because I didn't, it's like, okay, I got this, and there are some really practical things like how you sit on a chair, the kind of shoes you wear, all kinds of things affect your psoas. So I could do that. But when I got into this primal kind of, because you have to, nervous system, let's take it to the nervous system. Psoas is part of the primal, what we call the reptilian brain. It's not about the cortex. It's not about the front brain. It's in the back. So you're now creating a relationship between animal body, your instincts, your intuition, your knowing, this animal who knows things, and the cortex that's going to be very left brain oriented because we write. There's a book called The Alphabet and the Goddess about how did we get into a patriarchal, misogynistic world, is through the abstraction of life. And it developed, the left brain develops, and the right hand is where we aim for the, spear to be thrown. We've lost the gestalt of the brain and the capacity for both sides of the brain to be very functional, which of course the right brain is associated with the feminine, right? Is with the caring and the nurturing. So we've kind of off balance there. But what happens in this animal body is that if we attend to our animal body, if we allow the animal body to be honored, to be part, that we are earth, we're not above the earth, we're not controlling the earth, we literally are the earth. Once we kind of land here on earth and we allow the animal body's knowing to come forward, and that's the tail up. That's the tail that swishes. It's the tail that's you'll look at an animal and you go like,
I see it.
Yeah. It's like you're reading that, there's the ears, there's the tail, there's the eyes, there's the teeth. But that tail has a lot. And you watch any cat, tail, it's telling you a lot of stuff. Your tail's got to be up, and you could be sassy. You have something to say. You are here to show up. So when we regain that, functional movement becomes really easy. That's the interesting thing. Your speed, your accuracy, your capacity, it all changes. And it took me a while to realize, oh, it's not the functional movement that makes me healthier. It's these primal movements that supports my functional movement.
Yes. That just makes so much sense. I wrote a book 6 years ago about mirroring your baby, actually, in the first year postpartum.
I want to do that.
We don't need to think too much about it. Just, mirroring, being on the floor, on the stomach, eye to eye, trying to crawl again, to just reboot ourselves.
Play.
Yes. Yeah. Play is important. Thank you so much.
Playing is essential. Playing is how animals hone their nervous systems.
Yes.
That is the imperative of life, is to play, because you have to be able to be in the unknown. You have to be able to be in a state in which you aren't just going from A to B. That's a sympathetic response to keep going someplace.
That's our culture. We've made this for ourselves, and yes. What you're saying is speaking very much into the womb wisdom, the ancient wisdom that we hold in our, a whole feminine body.
Yes.
That play, that lifting of the tail, and and being with that primal response is just very difficult for a lot of women to identify themselves with that person that does that, because we are so busy doing this.
Well, one of the things that we're talking about, and so we'll put it into a scientific way of understanding it intellectually, is that we're talking about the development of your kinesthetic intelligence.
Yeah.
So you have intellectual intelligence of reading and math and, writing and things like that. We have a heart connection of an emotional intelligence of learning a language to express what we're feeling and being able to identify a feeling. And we have a kinesthetic intelligence, and it is not valued in our culture. So you, as a child, you instinctively have that. That's why you're playing, right? You play. You are, and you are told to stop playing, pay attention, and focus. The minute you do that, you lose a very large range of intelligence that literally guides us in our sense of survival, in our thriving, in our expression. So really, we need all three. And we live in a Western culture, and I will say it's a Western culture. It's the colonized culture in which you dominate, and you dominate through the left side of the brain. It's very one-sided. it's very small in who we are as a human organism, yes, as a human being. And we see that in our world today, whether we actually stay here as a species or not. We have reached our maximum control. And that is not the way out of a problem. It's maintaining that problem. So we're really in a wonderful, amazing opportunity here to recognize there may be other ways to do it. And the more resilient you are, so resiliency is what I look in the nervous system. So proprioception is a word that's used for your nervous system's ability to pick up sensory information, not just from the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, taste, touch, things like that, but internally, where I locate. One of them is called the vestibular system in the inner ear. And it's very connected to the pelvis, because if I wear bifocals, for example, my pelvis is not going to locate the same way, because I'm constantly controlling my head. If I'm always looking at my phone and I'm down and I'm walking, I'm disrupting this relationship between head and pelvis. So pelvis talks to head talks to pelvis. So these proprioceptors are in all kinds of tissue, but the one the psoas talks to the most, or is the picking up, is feeling into or messaging about, is our skeletal proprioception, because its bones resonate. The frequency of bone is the rhythm of the earth. So our minds might be going the speed of the internet, but our bones are going to the rhythm of the earth. And when we're not on the earth, if our paws don't land on the earth, mm-hmm, our nervous system, our psoas in particular, is messaging, you are not safe, because the animal body isn't safe, right? If I can't pick up the nuance of my location, of my terrain, not only through my eyes and ears, like, seeing things and feeling, smelling things and tasting things and hearing things, but through my bones as an animal body, I pick up that vibration that's maybe the elephants, over far, far away, that none of those other senses can pick up. I know something is coming. I feel it. That's what we call female intuition, right? Our womb is this amazing organ of knowing.
Yes.
So when we honor that, instead of seeing it as an extraction, as seeing our babies as hitchhikers, instead of seeing somebody has to deliver me, we're actually talking about the wisdom of the female body to gather, to nourish, to care for, to heal. So I feel it's imperative for women to stop trying to fulfill this dominant paradigm of the hierarchy of top down and go back to their womb and go back to their knowing. Yes, that is the empowerment. That's it. It's not pretending, it's not saying I can do what a man can do. It's not on that level. It doesn't mean I might not do what a man does. It has to do with actually knowing my animal body.
And from home, our home.
Yes.
Connection to
and that's connected to a vibration through the bones for men and women. That's where we locate. And Psoas is always talking about its message. So even when it seems like, gosh, I want to shut up, nothing I do. And so if people are feeling, most times you feel it either here as a kind of constriction, a pulling up, a control, or you feel it at your hip sockets. It has two nerve innervations. So you can feel it different places, but you want the wholeness. But at the hip socket, it's that rigidity around the hip socket, it's that density. It's that I just want to get in there and release it type of impulse. But that doesn't actually change the quality of the tissue, because the quality of the tissue is based on its having to keep repeating the same message, which is part of its exhaustion. Okay, you're not hearing its message because you're not paying attention, or you don't understand the language yet.
Yes.
And you're kind of trying control mechanisms here, trying to handle this. But really, our body speaks up. Our gut brain talks. It's, it has more bacteria and critters than we have human cells.
Yeah.
So scientifically, who are we? What am I, right? Yeah, it changes our paradigm, and it's thrilling in a way because it brings us back to kinship. It brings us back to this deep intuitive knowing that is so rich in pleasure. You know, it's full of pleasure, and that's what play is. Play is pleasure. It's the pleasure of life. It's the enjoyment of life. It's the loving of it. You know, and
there's so much there's so much forgiveness, there's so much returning to home that the work of healing of the womb in that you're saying right there.
Yeah.
Pleasure, play, yes, for all women.
Yeah.
I have a few questions just to round up our conversation. Actually, I'm just going to read them just to see if they're relevant, and if not, we're gonna yes, so there's one lady here who is quite young. She's had a hysterectomy, and she's asking, how do we nourish the psoas in the best way? And she's had a lot of surgery, a lot of things removed, and in the end, a hysterectomy. So she has a lot of trauma, as she explains it herself. I think you've been around this already. If you have a few words around that, we can end with that in the end of this conversation.
Well, I think that when we have one of the ways to think about body is the living tissue. Okay, the living tissue, the connection, and one of the things that what the organism needs is called coherency. And so what does that mean? And it's a word that actually comes out of heart math, was the first place I heard it. And that was the science of the heart itself and our relationship as an organism to the energy field of our body. So energy fields play a big part in how we feel wholeness within us. So, you know, just as somebody can lose a limb and still feel it, you know, we can lose a womb and still feel it.
Yes.
So there's the field of coherency. But what, as a mammal, we are, is we actually need co-regulation. And this leads us to people like Stephen Porges' work with the polyvagal system. But it's also what we instinctively know as women, as mothers, as lovers, as, you know, a community of gathering, of gatherers, you know, is this co-regulation, the idea of, you know, hugging somebody. You know, what are we doing when we're doing that? We're giving love, but we're also literally have body to body, we're regulating. So think of the wild bear, you know, the mama bear, and baby bear is flailing in some way, you know, trying to climb a tree, and the branch breaks, and this is too much for me. And mama bear goes over, takes baby bear and holds it. Well, as mammals, we need that same regulation. All mammals co-regulate. They don't live in, you know, that's what our species does. So what happens if I didn't get that? What happens if I, you know, was in a nursery crying it out because I'm being taught to sleep? I mean, I'm releasing opiates, which causes a lot of problems, and I will fall asleep eventually, but that's actually a trauma response. So many of us have been traumatized through very early birth experiences, maybe even conception, all the way, you know, through our lives. And then here we are, mothers or women who are trying to regulate ourselves. And we don't actually know a lot about regulation. We've made it this far. So one thing you can always say, and for the young woman, is to recognize that you're still here and you've still made it. So that fluid system is doing pretty well, holding, you know, your whole matrix together. Mm-hmm. But the piece with co-regulation is nature is the greatest co-regulator. You know, mama nature, mother nature, yes, going, putting your belly literally to the ground, putting your body on the ground, you know, putting your body on a tree, literally putting your feet in the soil, your hands in the garden, you know, literally connecting, sitting by a river and listening to the vibrational field of that flow. These are how we remember ourselves.
Yes, Beautiful. Thank you so much for those words, Liz. Where can we find you? Would you mention your website, please?
coreawareness.com.
Yes. So you have courses, you have Zoom workshops and more.
I have Zoom workshops that I do now that are current, but I also, because of COVID, I've changed my whole way of teaching, to being live, to being online for now. And if you go into the schedule, you can see what's happening currently, but you can scroll down and you'll see recorded courses. They're 2 hours. And so many of them, one of them is called Self-Care for Yourselves.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so
much. That would be a good place. And if you're interested in that neuro core, look for the one that says coherency. And that will teach you about, so if you want the science and the ideas as well as the movement. But self-care for your psoas is a great place to learn to care for yourself and to start finding these simple, not only forward and back movements, but the one that doesn't take us anywhere is the lateral fish movement. Yeah. Finding the lateral fish movement through your core is it takes the psoas, into like the dry sponge. You're going in and then you're opening. And so you're if you find a dry sponge and you pour water on it, usually the water pours off. But if you start to take it in your hand, you start moving it, all of a sudden it plumps up. So that idea of how long will this take? Mm-hmm. It has to do with that tenderness and that kind of feeling in. And then it really truly is a gestalt. It's not a linear path. All of a sudden, my organism is like, gee, I haven't had to do anything to center my pelvis. I don't have to do any of those things anymore, which is what I discovered. It was like, oh, I don't do any of those things to kind of pull myself back together. It's just like I'm more coherent. It just happened. I don't know, and that's the excitement of it. You don't know when it's going to happen, but all of a sudden it's like, what? There it is.
Thank you with that.
Yeah, the organism wakes up and it goes, oh, here I am. I know where I am now. Okay.
Hey, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Liz, for joining us here and inspiring all these women for their further journey into the pelvis and the diaphragm of the pelvis, let's say.
Yes.
And we are going to change this paradigm. We're going to change the language, and we have started it already. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for being one of the people changing the language of body.
Namaste.
Namaste.
So see you, ladies. I will talk to you in the group in a few minutes. And thank you, Liz. Have a beautiful day. I'll see you.